Some people think they are their body. Some people think they are their thoughts. Many people have not even thought about it at all. But in reality, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness or the soul that observes those thoughts. And it's possible for that soul to reprogram the mind. The awareness can reprogram the mind. To calm the mind means that you go in, you look at the conditioned self-sabotage behaviors, you look at the stresses, you look at tricks and triggers that the mind uses to bring up stresses and conditioned behaviors, and you start disconnecting the buttons that are driving you crazy. If you're drowning in anger, guilt, fear, or grief, you're not going to be able to hone in on what's really going on. It's static in the radio. And so that process of understanding that conditioning, not being controlled by it, not letting your thoughts get swamped with stress, constantly being in that fight or flight situation is absolutely a prerequisite to being able to really know yourself.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Sean Sessel. We're going to talk about how to reprogram yourself so you can live an abundant, joyful, rich life. You don't need to settle. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote comes from Gandhi. True happiness is impossible without true health, and true health is impossible without a rigid control of the palate. All the other senses will automatically come under control when the palate has been brought under control. And he who has conquered his senses has really conquered the whole world, and he becomes a part of God. We're going to talk about conquering ourselves today and not behaving the way we do because society says we have to. It's about creating a life you enjoy and love. So before we get to that, let's review last week's action step was to explore if a coach can help you achieve your goals. Here's the bottom line. If you're hitting your goals, great. That's awesome. But if you're not, and you're hitting friction and you're getting stuck, what are you going to do to push through that? Some people, it's a one-time coaching session. Some people, it's a class. Some people, it's having somebody to hold you accountable on an ongoing basis. You've got to figure out what works for you and make the investment in yourself. That's how you bring about change. You know, if you think about it, 100 years ago, Einstein was just figuring out the basic principles of universal laws. We've come a long way in the past 100 years. Just imagine, though, how ill-informed we will be to people 100 years from now. And to think that a baby born this year has a very high likelihood of being alive in 100 years. Can you imagine how much change they will encounter? I know people have already encountered a lot of change in the last 100 years, but most of them retired before the internet became a thing, and most of them are not alive today. What will we learn in these next 100 years? My guess, a lot of it will be about how we as humans behave and why we do the things we do. AI may help us to make better decisions and overcome our biases. Maybe we'll learn to ignore social media notifications. The future is bright, and you need to focus on how you will continue to adopt. We will also have improvements in healthcare, where the solutions won't be a band-aid like it is today with drugs, but truly changes the underlying causes of the diseases. Hopefully, we will have a healthy fuel supply for our bodies instead of what many people eat today in this country. We're going to talk about that and more in today's show. Our guest today is Sean Sessel, who is a voracious learner with a fervent belief in the ability of the individual to better himself or herself. After an epiphany that he derived intrinsic enjoyment from continual learning and sharing of that knowledge with others, he decided to make a career of it, and he started the Oculus Institute. Sean helps individuals escape burnout jobs and craft careers that truly inspire and pay well. He works with people to prevent self-sabotage, dissolve stress, and discover their personal power and value. Sean has developed a unique system called psychohacking that is fundamentally different and more powerful than other schools of internal work like NLP and LOA. Psychohacking is grounded in the truth, not selectively choosing beliefs, references, or focusing only on the positive. And it uses observation to deconstruct mental barriers subconsciously. Sean proudly boasts a 100% success rate in providing his clients with the results promised upon entering his program. Before Oculus, Sean was director of quantitative research and co-portfolio manager at Tectonic Advisors, a registered investment firm with over $1 billion in assets under advisement. Prior to that, he worked as an associate at Boston Consulting Group, where he specialized in consumer survey analysis and organizational structures. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Richer Soul, Sean Sessel. It's great to have you join us today.
Happy to be here.
And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about your story and the work that you're doing. But before we get to that, let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, so I didn't learn much about money in school. As you probably are aware, the educational system in this country doesn't do a great job of educating people about money, which is one of the reasons why I imagine you do what you do. Fortunately, at home, I did have a pretty strong money education. And the reason is that my father was an entrepreneur. My father is an immigrant from South Africa. And he came to this country. He built a couple businesses. He was involved as a early equity hire in a startup that ended up becoming a really big company. And so I was raised with that it was okay to be ambitious about money. A lot of people have blocks around money. They have the belief that they can never have money, or that if they did, they would create some kind of conflict with their social circle, that kind of stuff. I'm very fortunate and very privileged. I didn't grow up with any of that baggage, but I also wasn't driven to the idea that money was the be all and the end all. One thing I was told by my parents when I was young was, Sean, whatever you want to do is great. Just make sure that you're really good at it and make sure that you do something meaningful. So I was very fortunate to have a very good money foundation of not being torn either way towards like money obsession or money repulsion, the way that, sometimes happens.
And that's not the normal upbringing that parents usually do for kids. So you are correct. You were privileged. So you had this wonderful upbringing. Did everything just work out wonderful and you had financial success and life was beautiful?
That's not the case. I mean, obviously every family has their ups and downs. We had ours. Obviously it wasn't around money. But overall, things were pretty good. I went off to university. I went to a great university. I got a engineering degree. I ended up going into business. I worked at a big consulting firm called Boston Consulting Group. And up to this point, things had never really been like that hard for me because I didn't study a lot in school. I still got very good grades. Like I took to learning very naturally because that's my function in this world, is to absorb and transmit information. And then I went to BCG and I was in a position where I was working very long hours. And sometimes it was stuff that was valuable. And sometimes it was stuff where, I'm sure you've heard of people who have jobs where they have to do things just to do them, just to put in the FaceTime kind of stuff. And I had been told that wouldn't be the case, but it was. And so there started to be this friction between me and management at BCG. And initially, I was a very good analyst, so I was able to get away with some stuff. But eventually it got to be too much. And they started working me really hard. And I started having a lot of inner conflict because as much as I'd been told, hey, money isn't the be all and the end all, I still had this conception that if I wasn't, on some prestigious career path, that I was like screwing up and I wasn't safe and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know where that came from, but it definitely was something that was there. And so I burned out pretty badly at BCG. I ended up getting fired after 3 incidents with the partners of pretty substantial arguments. After the third one, that was a wrap for me. So I went freelancing. I was able to make twice as much in less than half the time. Again, you might say life is good. I didn't have any money problems, but I wasn't fulfilled. So I was out, I was partying, I was, engaging in questionable activities. And eventually my biggest client brought me on full time, supposedly with equity, which never ended up materializing. But while I was at that job, I ended up burning out again. And this time it wasn't so much the time as it was almost it was definitely the relationship dynamic with the primary business owner who'd hired me. And I was in finance at that new company. And so then I'd been in consulting, I'd been in finance, I'd done great work, but I'd burned out 2 times. And I started to get this belief that it was not possible to be conventionally successful and financially successful and also be happy. That if you wanted to be successful, you had to sell your soul to the corporate man and do this kind of stuff and submit to, kind of a submissive kind of dominance dynamic. And that was not something that I could accept. That was a belief that was really difficult for me to digest. And it got to the point where I was looking out and I was saying, well, I'm either going to be broke or I'm going to be miserable. And if that's my life, then I don't want to live either of those 2 lives. And I got to a really dark place. I got really depressed. I got to the point where I was staring down the barrel of my pistol on more than one occasion. But I had this sense of hope that things could turn around. And I don't know where it came from, but I had this sense of hope that I could find a way to both be happy and be financially successful. And, there was a series of very coincidental events or synchronicity events, however, or, meant to be events, however you want to frame it. But the result was that I did end up getting clear that my function in this world, like what I'm here to do, what fulfills me and makes me happy, is to absorb, process, and transmit information. And then the question for me was, okay, how do I take that, use it to add more value or add as much value as possible with that skill set and that activity set? And thus, by adding all that value, then monetize that and be financially successful as well. So that's kind of my journey.
And I think a lot of people struggle with that, working for the man or working in corporate America. Most people probably don't get to the point that you are, but they become accepting of it. And they settle. I mean, do you think most people settle in corporate or?
I don't think it. I know it because I know the polls, right? So Gallup says that 85% of people aren't happy with their jobs. 18% of them are actively disengaged, which means that it's so bad that they're undermining their boss or stealing office supplies or, fighting with their colleagues or whatever. But the majority of Americans, 67%, are just disengaged, right? They're blasé, they've settled, and they go, oh, well, I guess this is all that life has to offer. And I'm the kind of guy who I never settle, I've never settled in any aspect of my life. And I wasn't willing to start with something as central as my career. And I think if I had one message to give to people is that you don't have to settle. You may have to work really, really, really hard to not settle, but it's totally worth it.
It is true. I mean, you do have to do the work. And I think that's a message that people do need to understand. So how did we get here as a society? How do we end up at this place where this is what everyone feels?
Well, so that's something that I can explain in great detail, believe it or not. So there is let's go way back to the 1800s, right? The Industrial Revolution is going on. And in Prussia, which is it's an area that is now Germany, there was a system that they developed that was derived from the military, because Prussia was a very militaristic state, where they created this education system that was designed to churn out obedient, productive industrial workers, right? That was the goal, because you had a country that was trying to industrialize, trying to build its military, trying to build its economy, would ultimately go on to become the core of, World War I Germany, and then eventually World War II Germany. And so that education system was called the Prussian Common School System. And then in the late 1800s and early 1900s, as people were kind of laying out what the standard for education would be in America, that is exactly the system that was adopted. There was a guy named Horace Mann who argued and advocated for adopting that Prussian school system. And that's fundamentally the same system we have today, where, the kids get in line, they march to class, they sit down, the teacher tells them things, they march to the next class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem with that system is that it's entirely built on obedience. And it's entirely built on deferring to authority. And then our whole society has been built around that. So you go from having that in school to then having the same thing in university to then having the same thing in your job with your boss. And it's just one authority figure to the next: parents, teacher, professor, boss. And because that's the structure that most people do, it's kind of woven into us from an early age that that's the only safe option. And it comes from all sources. I mean, as I said, I had an upbringing that was not like, my parents didn't subscribe to that view, but most society did. And I still ended up holding that view until it was broken very forcefully. So people think that if you get off that path and stop doing what other people tell you to do, that like the big scary poverty monster will eat you. And there's a very primal fear of it that's inculcated in us from a young age.
And I was going to ask, because I think underlying there is a good amount of fear. But before we get to that, I was just wondering, have you seen Seth Godin's work on Stop Stealing Dreams? Because he talks about this very same subject, and he's actually got some material out there of how to possibly start the conversation to change the system.
I have actually not seen that. I'm definitely going to go look that up. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. So how much does fear play into this?
I would say that fear is the primary contributor to it. So much so that, when I look at all of the internal blocks, all the things that stop people from doing what they need to do, 90% of it is internal blocks rather than strategic blocks. But of those internal blocks, I would say the vast majority of it is fear. And that's the thing, is that we as humans are evolved to be very prone to fear, because we evolved in a time when there were a lot of things that could kill us, and when mistakes could cost us a lot. We evolved in a time of scarcity, but we now live in a society of abundance. We have created, there's so much opportunity, whether it be the fact that, we don't have to worry about food security the way we used to. We don't have to worry about getting eaten by tigers. We don't have to worry about other tribes killing us. The fact that we can connect to people all over the world via the internet. There is so much opportunity out there, but the human mind is wired to be afraid rather than to be hopeful, because that's what served us then, and it doesn't serve us now. And so it takes a very conscious effort to break out of that fear and to break free of the majority dynamic and the way that society expects us to be. And ultimately, I would love to help change the conversation. That's why I'm definitely going to go look up that resource you mentioned, because until we as a society change that conversation, we're going to have a far too many people who are, wasting their lives in something that makes them miserable and not contributing to the best of their abilities, which is holding the whole species back. Like all of humanity is held back when you take somebody who could be doing something amazing and you have them doing something meaningless.
So you mentioned fear was one of the blocks. What are some of the other blocks that you've seen?
Oh, yeah. So some of the other blocks that I've seen is, for example, feelings of unworthiness. So people, they feel like they don't deserve to be happy or successful. And normally that comes out of childhood stuff, developmental trauma disorder in particular, which was supposed to be added to the DSM-5, but they made the decision not to add it to the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is the psychiatric diagnosis manual for those listeners who aren't familiar. I expect it will end up in the DSM-6. But developmental trauma disorder, where there's like abuse or hostility or neglect in the home, can lead to people having a lot of feelings that they aren't worthy. Some of the other things are that stuff we were talking about earlier about negative attitudes towards money. So if people believe that rich people are evil, well, then they're going to subconsciously avoid being rich at all costs because that would make them evil. And most people don't make that connection. But like if that's the view that you hold and that's the view that the people in your social circle hold, then your mind is subconsciously going to stop you from being really successful. Because like who wants to be evil and hated by all their friends? Like so like beliefs like that, those kind of self-sabotage money mindset things are also another big factor.
And that's very true. These are a lot of the topics that we have touched on in the past on the show. And so it's always nice to hear it from different subjects and from different people coming at it from different ways. It just helps to get that viewpoint across. And I've heard you say with the right knowledge and the commitment to take action on that knowledge, anyone can unlock their potential and create drastic improvements in their lives.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of people are going to say, what is the right knowledge?
Well, so the right knowledge is going to depend on the person, obviously. But if we were to take some high level stuff and just kind of break it down, I would say that the first piece of knowledge that you really need is you need to know what your purpose is. And there's a lot of supporting legs to that. But having that target is very important. Many people don't have a target for their career at all. They're like, oh, well, I'm in this job and I don't like this job, so I'm going to go get another job that's almost identical to the job that I hate, and maybe that'll work out. And obviously, that doesn't work out very much. So the first thing is to get the target. Now, the next component is
hang on, before we go to the next one.
Okay.
I think people struggle with this one. How do you figure out your purpose?
So there are a couple components to that. The first is you want to get clear on what your behavioral tendencies are. So like I had a client once who came to me and he'd tried 28 different jobs and he was still miserable. But when I looked at the 28 jobs he tried, and when I looked at a breakdown of his natural behavioral tendencies, he had essentially been in almost all sales positions and he was naturally an introvert. So like that, obviously that creates a pretty big disconnect. So if you look at things like and one of the tests I would really recommend is the DISC test created by, I think William Marston Moulton was his name, but you can get it from like Target Training International or a couple other people. But the DISC gives you a pretty good assessment of whether you're going to be someone who's really detail oriented or really people oriented or really process oriented or any of that kind of stuff. So you want to do something that's in line with your natural behavioral tendencies. I mean, that's 50% of people are misaligned with that right there. The next thing you want to look at is what's called motivators. And there's another test that's that's sometimes administered alongside the DISC test called the motivators test. But you can look at, for example, what is your motivator when it comes to power? Are you the kind of person who likes to be in control and take responsibility for big decisions? Or are you the kind of person who likes to have more structure and have some collaboration and be able to avoid making decisions that are really stressful to you? Are you the kind of person who likes to follow rules? Are you the kind of person who really needs to feel like you're making an impact and helping people? Or is it something where you're, happy to take care of you and yours rather than big global causes? Are you somebody who's motivated by constant growth? Like all of those kinds of things. You want to, figure out where you stand on those kinds of, and again, I would highly recommend people go take the DISC and the motivators. You can actually get both of them from www.tonyrobbins.com/disc. And I would recommend getting the $10 report that gives you your numbers, because it's easier to interpret those numbers than it is to trust the computer. The computer printout is not very, very good. But so like, if you look at stuff like that, that's really helpful. But the real kicker, like that's preliminary stuff that'll get you in the right ballpark. The real kicker is you have to get clear on what your true values are. And this is kind of challenging because most people are so conditioned that they can't tell their values from the values that have been put into them by society and by people in their lives. And so there's a kind of an extensive process of deconditioning and spiritual introspection that has to come before and precede the actual values discovery. And once you've kind of done that deconditioning, then you can do the values discovery stuff, which is things like, what do you naturally want to spend your time on? What do you spend time thinking about? What do you want to spend your money on? You're excited to spend your money on? What do you resist? Like all that those kinds of questions will help you hone in on your true values. There's a very strong link between values and money. Right. So like, obviously, this is something that you probably, have talked about on this podcast at some point, but people's money will naturally go to what they value. Right. And then if they're spending money on something they don't value, there's going to be a lot of resistance and stress about it. So, but you do have to do that period of introspection primarily to get rid of the fears and the I have to's and all that kind of stuff, which can muddy the waters a lot.
You can learn a lot about a person by looking at their calendar and their checkbook.
Oh, I totally agree with that statement. That will show you so much.
Yeah, it shows you what they value, right? You may say
Absolutely.
one thing, but if you look at where you spend your time and where you spend your money, it's clear cut what your values are.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the only addendum I would add to that, the only exception I would add to that is that there are a lot of people who spend time and money on things that they don't really value because they think they have to, because they've absorbed somebody else's values. And so the value is there in their totem pole, but it's not there naturally. It's something that's been put in there by somebody else or by their conditioning. And getting that out is really key to getting clear on the values that are actually going to make you happy.
How long does it take to decondition someone?
Well, I have a process where it can be done in as little as 3 months. Normally, I mean, when I went through a much less sophisticated, but still really powerful process when I was younger, it took me a couple years. But I took my engineering mindset and I said, okay, listen, what has to happen here? What's the order we need to put these in? How can we make this as efficient as possible? Where can we condense? Where can we not condense? But it can be done in as little as 3 months.
So it takes time. These are not overnight solutions. You don't change.
These are not overnight.
Correct. It's work. I mean, self-development is a journey and a process, and it does take time. And I think people need to realize that you do it step by step.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd go further than that. I wouldn't say not just that it takes time, but when I say, a little less than 3 months, I mean when you're working on it every single day. This isn't like, 3 months check in on it once a week kind of thing. Like there's a lot of work that goes into that process.
So for the average person, it might take a year or 2 years, or as you said, multiple years.
Well, it could, but honestly, the more you drag it out, the less likely it is to be successful. There's something to be said for momentum. And I would argue, we get back to the thing of like, how do you spend your time? If this isn't one of your top values and you're not focusing at least 15 minutes on it every single day, you're probably not going to get there anyways.
And that's not a very large commitment. 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes is just consistency. And, it involves hard choices and like looking at parts of yourself that you may not want to see. It's not the time that normally gets people. It's the difficulty of seeing things for what they are and becoming aware of things that most people hide from themselves.
The reflection in the mirror is your number one obstacle.
Yeah, well, he can also be your number one cheerleader once you get control of it.
That is very true. So I've heard you say one of the things that you say is to calm the mind so you can feel your soul. What does that mean?
Well, so the average human being has, let's break it up, right? Let's say you have the body, then you have the mind, and then you have the awareness or the soul. So the body is what everybody's aware of in their physical reality. The mind is the thoughts. Now, most people think that they are their thoughts, right? Some people think they are their body. Some people think they are their thoughts. Many people have not even thought about it at all. But in reality, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness or the soul that observes those thoughts. Right. And it's possible for that soul to reprogram the mind. Right. The awareness can reprogram the mind. And so to calm the mind means that you go in, you look at the conditioned self-sabotage behaviors, you look at the stresses, you look at the tricks and triggers that the mind uses to bring up stresses and conditioned behaviors, and you start disconnecting the buttons that are driving you crazy. So if you're drowning in anger, guilt, fear, or grief, you're not going to be able to hone in on what's really going on. It's static in the radio. And so that process of understanding that conditioning, not being controlled by it, not letting your thoughts get swamped with stress, and constantly being in that fight or flight situation is absolutely a prerequisite to being able to really know yourself.
It's kind of I just read Ryan Holiday's book, Stillness. Mm-hmm. And it's, I think it comes along those lines of you have to first be still so you can have the time and the mental capacity to sort through all of those different things.
Yep. Because most people, they go like hamster on a wheel every single day. And that's just going to run you ragged. And then that causes you to be very reactive rather than, being calm and then being proactive. You can't be proactive until you're calm, right? So people say switch from reactive to proactive, but you have to go through that calm first.
And that's very true. So a lot of our listeners are high net worth, they're business owners. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they look at this and go, this is a little woo-woo. This is a little out there. How is this going to help me put more money in my pocket, right? Because that's at the end of the day, we do need the money to fuel the life we want to lead. What do you say to those people?
Well, so I would say that I'm a man of science, right? I got my degree in biomolecular engineering. I was nationally published twice before I was old enough to buy a beer. And I didn't used to believe in any of this either, right? But what happened was somebody convinced me to do something very simple, which is to run experiments. Does it? So don't take anything for granted. Don't believe anything anybody says. Just run some experiments. Observe this and see what happens. And so I've been running those experiments on myself and on my clients. I started running them on myself 12 years ago. And then, of course, been running them on my clients for several years because that's how my clients run those experiments on themselves and get the results. And the data doesn't lie. Right? When you go and you dissolve the stress, then, if you look at my clients, it's not unusual for them to experience increases in annual income potential of $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Right? So when you align and you get yourself out of that high cortisol, which, by the way, is another scientifically proven thing, the cortisol pathway and the adrenaline pathway and the effects that it has on your health and your ability to focus and your cognition, that's all well documented. And then you develop the ability to unlock the potential to add a lot more value. And once you add a lot more value, then you can monetize a lot more value and you can increase your income.
And that makes a lot of sense. I just want people to be aware of that connection that, we're not telling you to give up money. We're telling you improve yourself so that you have the ability to make even more money. Yeah, exactly. This isn't an either or. And I think that that's one of the big myths that society will feed people is that you can either be happy or make money. And I would say that that's not true, right? The whole starving artist myth doesn't come from, hey, if you pursue your dream, you don't make money. It comes from the fact that most of those people don't know how to monetize the value that they add. And that's something when we go back to the question you asked earlier about like, what's the right knowledge? You need to be able, if you want to make a good living, you need to be able to sell yourself, whether that be for a job, in an interview and on resumes, whether that be freelancing, whether that be as an entrepreneur. You have to be able to persuade other people of the value that you can add. And that's sales and marketing. And that's a critical skill set if you want to be financially successful. And it's one that I've touched on in the past. That's how I spent my career, and I know the value of it. And I think people should understand that everyone should learn some basic sales skills, because everything you do is essentially selling, whether it's getting a date and getting married, or trying to convince your kids to do something, or get a job, or if you're in your own business, to sell the products that you have. That all comes down to sales. And we're going to have a whole episode on sales, so we'll dig into that separately. So the question I have is, because I know this comes up, and you even said it earlier, what do you do when you're an introvert and you have to sell?
Well, so I would say that if you're an introvert, you should try to avoid the sales as much as possible. So there are a lot of ways that you can, for example, like let's say you go get a job as a coder, for example, you sell yourself once to a company and then they take care of the rest, right? Now, if you're somebody who doesn't work well in a structured environment, then I would recommend using the detail that because most introverts have a pretty good attention to detail and to process. Use that detail and process to systematize the sales. So for example, let's say you're let's say you're a coder, you don't like the structure, you don't like the corporate structure. So you can go on a freelance site like Upwork or TopTool or any of these other sites, and you use a process for how you construct your bio and how you send your proposals. And, I have processes for these that I obviously, use with many of my clients. But once you have those processes, then you don't have to focus on trying to be persuasive. You focus on filling in the gaps of the blanks of your structure with what the client needs and what you're capable of delivering. And you turn it into because fundamentally, people do operate in reliable, repeatable ways most of the time. And so that's how you can use those strengths to become a better salesperson without having to avoid having to really sell the same way that, a hardcore closer would.
And yeah, for me, I don't think hardcore closer is the way to sell. I think sales has gotten the bad rap of the used car salesman. I don't think that's really what it's all about. Sales, it at its truest is helping people to solve the problem they have. It's showing them a solution. And that's really where sales gets to be great.
I would say that the other component of sales is not just showing the solution, but getting to the truth, right, of what's really going on. Especially for me in the coaching business, a lot of people are not clear on what a problem is really costing them, or not clear on the implications of what happens if they don't fix it. And if you get to the truth and it's real, then it's a lot easier to say, hey, listen, I can help you solve this. Here's what it looks like. Let's go. And then there doesn't have to be any pressure. There doesn't have to be any, shaming or anything. It's just like, hey, I asked you some questions. You told me this is what's up. You're real about it because people like to paper over it. And now let's fix it.
That's quite intriguing. Today's episode is brought to you by Profit Comes First. As a profit-first professional, I help entrepreneurs and small business owners to grow their business profitably. Most business owners focus on top-line revenue, and while that's important, the bottom line, what you take home and what's available to reinvest in the business, is what drives continued long-term success. Hundreds of thousands of companies are using the profit-first model in their business. You don't have to learn fancy accounting systems or learn how to read complicated financial statements. You just implement the cash flow system and behave very much like you currently do. However, you pay yourself first. Through our coaching and consulting calls, we ensure your business is on track, and I'm making sure you keep spending in line with your increasing your profitability. Learn more at profitcomesfirst.com and schedule a no-obligation call to see how Profit Comes First can help put more money in your pocket. So a lot of what we just talked about, it's on your website, and I think it comes under the term of psychohacking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So psychohacking is all that internal work that I was talking about. That's the system that I told you about that is a little under 3 months. That's the psychohacking system.
And so then another thing that you had listed on your website, and I think this one, again, it needs to be explained because I don't think people will understand it when I say the word, which is mysticism.
Yeah, mysticism. So If you look at the world of spirituality, it's very unorganized. And so I have tried to the best of my ability to take the terms out there and then define them and segment them and categorize them and all that kind of stuff. Mysticism is about helping people access the higher states. So things like gratitude, like love. And when I say love, the English language isn't great with the word love because the Greeks had 4 different words for it. I'm specifically referring to the term agape, which is a deep human understanding and connection, to things like empowerment, to things like, like bliss, like all that kind of stuff. Mysticism is about helping people get into those higher states, as well as states like being, vitally present, not living in the past or the future, and, some other higher spiritual states. But mysticism is about reaching those higher states. A lot of psychohacking is about getting people out of lower states so that they have the clarity to move forward. And then a lot of mysticism is about helping people get into those higher states to give them the fuel to really do amazing things.
And so what would be one example of something someone could do to get into a higher state?
I mean, I'll just give you the first mysticism exercise that I have all of my advanced clients in my mastermind do. And that is go write down everything that you're grateful for. And I give them like 20 or 25 prompts for that. But you go write down 100 things that you're grateful for, and you will definitely get to a higher state pretty quickly. That said, I will give kind of a little bit of a caution flag there. And that is that you want to do the psychohacking before you do the mysticism. Because if you don't address the real issues that are underneath and you don't solve the problems that are dragging you down, and you only focus on the mysticism component and on those higher states, you run the risk of what's called spiritual bypass. And so I'm sure you've seen people who, they're like, hey, listen, all I have to do is think positive. I don't have to worry about any of this other stuff. And they don't confront their inner demons. They don't confront their issues, and they just try to paper over it. And it creates this disconnect. And that's where, like you were saying, the business people who are like, hey, listen, this woo-woo stuff, that's the kind of disconnect that they look at and say, this doesn't work. You have to start by doing the difficult work before you go and do the work that is easier, as it were, and more pleasant, right? There has to be balance in all things.
And I've heard many people talk about gratitude journals, which is essentially what you're talking about, is to start your day with gratitude and to be thankful for many of the wonderful things you have. And it can be quite simple. I mean, this morning I was really thankful for hot water and a wonderful shower. We have a beautiful shower at home. And that's the time where, and I've come to realize there's no other distraction. And so that's when I get to think, right? That's where all your great thoughts come to you. I even tried to see if I could find a digital waterproof recorder, but no luck yet. Because I'm like, all my best thoughts come here, and then I leave and I forget them all. So I got to figure out how to get them down on paper. I do have one of those pads you can write notes on in the shower. So that's kind of cool.
Think about getting a smart home. Get one of those smart homes and be like, Alexa, record this.
I guess you could. I don't know if it would be able to hear it over the water, though. That's the issue.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
It's something to invent. I think because everyone says they have their best ideas in the shower. It's like, I guess I've seen some of those, they have these shaving mirrors with a built-in recorder, but I don't think you can it's not easy to get the information out of it, I think is the problem. I haven't looked enough into it, but it's just one of those things that's sitting in the back of my head. But back to the thing is, it's gratitude for simple things. Anyone who's listening to this podcast is essentially in the top 1% of the world. And it doesn't take a lot to be there. And what you have today is beyond comprehension of just 100 years ago. And I think too often we don't remember that. And we're not thankful for that.
I definitely, I second that. I third that. I fourth that. I mean, if you're making minimum wage in America, you're in the top 11% globally. But if you think about all of humanity that's ever lived, even somebody making minimum wage would be in the top 1% of humanity in history. And if you think about the listeners of this podcast, it's even higher. It's even 100 years ago, we live in ways that are inconceivable to even, the kings of 100 years ago.
And that is very true. I mean, I've been to a lot of third world countries and you get reminded rather quickly. Although these days, I think a lot of third world countries have dramatically improved. And it's to the point where many of them are practically first world in many, many different areas. And even if they aren't, you can live as if you're in first world in many of them because you can just pay and get everything without worry.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's from Africa, so he's taken me back a lot. And I remember when I was younger in the early 90s, he took me through the slums of Johannesburg. And that was an experience. And it opened my eyes to the differential between how I lived and how some people lived. But even when I went back just a couple of years ago, I went through almost exactly the same part of town, and it was radically different than it was, 20 years prior.
And that's true. I've seen that happening all over the world, and to the point where everyone there literally has an iPhone or a smartphone, and they've got access to information. They've got the ability to have so much more. And the amount of money they have individually has also gone up. So definitely a much better place. One of the other things that you talk about is practical metaphysics. Can you explain that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So now we're getting into stuff that a lot of people will say, oh, this is woo-woo stuff. Most people are familiar with the idea of the law of attraction, right? That how you think is going to manifest in some way. And again, I'm a man of science, right? So I didn't initially buy into this until I tested it. And ultimately, I have I've developed this whole, theory of how that happens, because most physical laws, if you go to statistical thermodynamics and you start to derive most physical laws, they rely on the assumption of random quantum fluctuations. But we have a lot of information, a lot of studies that, quantum fluctuations are in fact not random, and that consciousness very much does play a role. And there are studies that, so far, scientists have not been able to connect all the dots there. It's on the leading edge. And so that channel does open the scope for how you're thinking and how your mind is operating in the state that your awareness is in to affect your reality. The kicker that I would say there is that merely thinking positive is not going to get you what you want. So as somebody who was a semi-professional gambler at one point, blackjack being my game of choice until I got banned by a couple of casinos, or a lot of casinos, I should say. I have seen a lot of gamblers come into the casino hoping to win, expecting to win, desiring to win, happy as they could be. And I can tell you the vast majority of them did not win. Las Vegas is not built on winners. And the reason is that they're a missing understanding. And so when I talk about practical metaphysics, and this is something I go over with my most advanced clients, is I actually have an equation for the stuff that you can break down and how it's going to affect your, quote unquote luck. And it's something that I've tested, that I've run experiments on, and that I've had other people run experiments on. And it's a lot more complicated than just think positive, but that does play a role. And so it's kind of a complex topic, but that's practical metaphysics for you. So it's like science. It's like if you take a physics class, it's not an easy topic.
And that's probably why it's for your advanced students.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last area that I saw was spiritual enlightenment. What does that mean?
So spiritual enlightenment is a term that is used very, very broadly in our society today. I go with the Jed McKenna theme of trying to distill it down to something simple and fencing off the other areas of spirituality into their respective places, which is why I've divided things up that way. But so spiritual enlightenment, I would say, at the end of the day, is just getting clear on what you know and what you don't know, what's true and what's not true, which primarily means unlearning a lot of things that we think are true. We think that we are separate beings. We think that we know what reality is. We think we know what is right and what is wrong. We think that we know that death is bad. We think a lot of things. We think we know what happens when you die. We think, all kinds of things that we really don't know. At the end of the day, the only thing that you can truly know is that you exist as a conscious being and that you are having a particular kind of subjective experience at this moment, right? I don't know that you exist. Like, I presume that you exist. I act as if you exist, but you could be a figment of my imagination. I could be in the Matrix. I don't know. So it's kind of like brain boiling stuff. And there's not really any practical material benefit from it. But if people are driven to go to the bottom of the rabbit hole, that's the bottom of the rabbit hole.
Red pill, blue pill, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, so now you have a new book that's coming out. It's called Soulfire: Break Out of a Burnout Job and Craft a Career That Inspires You. What prompted you to write the book?
Well, so it was actually a suggestion from a mentor of mine who, was looking at my business model and seeing that I could only serve a small number of people who I could work with directly. And he, prompted me to say, hey, Sean, you should take all of your best stuff, all of your best content, everything that can be delivered without you being there, right? Which would be everything, that from how, like the highlights of how to get clear on your purpose, to looking at the planning, to the stuff we were talking about earlier about how things got this way and the mental shifts that people need to make, to going over internal blocks, a step-by-step process for dissolving fear, all that kind of stuff. And he said, take all that and put it into a book that you can get out to the masses, that you can get out so that more people can be touched by what you're doing. And, so that you can ultimately go from being a coach to somebody who's helping create a movement. And so, I was very grateful for that. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. His name's Adam Lyons. But so Adam told me to go and do this. And so I wrote the book. I've been working on it. I've been preparing for the whole, marketing campaign launch push kind of thing for many months now. And I'm really proud of it. I really think it's going to help a lot of people. I've gotten some really positive feedback from some of the friends and clients I've shared it with. So I'm psyched. I'm really pumped. I think that it will help, as you were talking about, change the conversation.
And that's what needs to happen. And congratulations on the book. I know many authors. I know how much work and effort and time goes behind writing the book. And then I know how much time and effort and work goes into promoting the book. And the latter is a lot harder than the former, actually. It's surprising the amount of effort that has to go into that whole endeavor. And it's one of the things that holds me back from it.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you're planning on doing it, that you want to get certain people who are very to help with certain key parts. You're going to want a really good editor. You're going to want a really good formatter for all the Amazon stuff. You're going to want a really good video person, or video team, I should say, because you're going to want somebody who's recording, somebody who's editing. If you find really good people to help you with that, it makes it a hell of a lot easier. Thankfully, I did.
And I know I've met tremendous amounts of people in that business, and all different price points, where they will take you through the whole process and do that. And so I totally understand that space. It's just, I also know it's a 6 month to 1 year commitment. And
that is accurate. Yes.
So that's another thing. It's like, it's on the back burner. It's not yet that time. One day.
One day. Looking forward to it.
So is there anything else that's in the book that we didn't cover already?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things. Like, I have, one of the things is the 3 questions that you need to ask yourself to know whether you need to make a career change or not. That's one that I think is really helpful to people who are kind of on the fence. I have something in there called the winning formula, which we kind of covered, which is that the 2 things that you need to be able to generate your own income security, which is adding value to other people and then being able to monetize that value. We kind of touched on that briefly. I go into some of the stuff about, that we briefly mentioned about DTD and some of the things that hold people back. But we covered, one thing we didn't cover very much was dream bridges. So that's kind of the planning process of, if you know where you want to go and you want to make, normally purpose, because it's so powerful, takes time to build. And so it's very important that you have something, like if you're in a toxic job, you want to get out now, but your purpose could take a lot of time to put together, and you want to maintain your financial security in the meantime. And that's where dream bridges come in. So I go into, different kinds of dream bridges, different ways that you can make more while being happier, to kind of bridge your way to where you ultimately want to be. So that's a topic we didn't really dive into. And then I've got a bunch of tips on how to monetize your value. So whether it be employment or freelancing platforms or entrepreneurship, I have a lot of stuff in there that are the kinds of things that I work with my clients on that previously were just not available to people unless they were coaching with me personally. So there's a lot of really actionable information, specifically in chapter 8 when it comes to increasing your income potential.
As you said, I think these are things that in the past weren't even available, in the sense that I don't know when podcasts were invented, but it wasn't much more than 10 years ago. The internet is essentially 25 years, maybe. These types of processes and the ability to share with the entire world at essentially, I mean, the cost of creating a website and a podcast is pennies. And if you want to do it cheap quality, it's almost free.
Yep.
There's nothing holding people back from at least starting the process. I know I take a lot of my clients through figuring out their purpose, and I tell them it takes months sometimes to go through the process, to think through it. And you've got to keep going. I think the biggest problem I get is people get stuck and they have friction. And that's why sometimes you can read a book, but if you don't have someone holding you accountable and walking you through it and helping you every time you get stuck, then you end up giving up and you kind of reinforce the negative belief system. And so that's where the power of coaching, I think, really changes things.
I completely agree with you. And I talk about that exact dynamic in chapter 12. That is one of the things that I talk about. Is it possible to do it yourself? Maybe 3% of cases, but do you want to bet that you're in the 3%, or do you want to, take the odds because if you're willing to do the work, a really good coach will get you there pretty much every time, right? If it almost always comes down to either somebody is, not a great coach or promising something they can't deliver, or people don't do the work. Like, those are the only two things that stop this venture from being successful. And I think one of the things that holds people back from investing in coaching is the fact that there are people out there who make promises that they can't deliver on. And so then that kind of causes them to shy away. But what I would say to that is that, do your homework. Look up people's Better Business Bureau stuff. Like, if somebody's a con artist, then it'll come out. Like, it's not going to, stay hidden, and if you have somebody who's respectable, then it really comes down to you and you putting in the work and getting the help that you need. And if you do that and you've got the information, you've got somebody who can help you see the gaps, and you've got the determination, then yeah, you're going to get there. You're going to make it happen.
And that's true. You have to do the work, because people ask me, what guarantee do you give me? And I go, I can't guarantee you anything because I don't know if you're going to do the work.
I say the exact same thing.
And so that's the struggle of it. But if you're willing to do the work, it does work. And you're right. You should evaluate your coach. You should look at, do they have success in life? I mean, it's the simplest thing is, if I go to a weight loss coach and he weighs 300 pounds, I know I'm not going to get results, right? I mean, it's guaranteed. So Look at the people who you're talking to. Are your coaches living the life you want?
Yep.
And that's one of the simplest way.
Did they get there by doing what they're telling you to do? Right. So there's some coaches who are, living the life that some people want. They're making a lot of money or something along those lines, but they did it by doing something other than what they're telling their clients to do. And that disconnect also doesn't work. So as you say, do your homework, right? Are they living authentically? Are they living in line with what they say? Like, all that kind of stuff.
And that's actually a conversation we were having earlier today. We were talking about investing advice. And I know there's a lot of big names out there that tell you to just go invest in the S&P 500 and that's how you build wealth. And that was the conversation. And we were like, well, wait a minute. None of those people who are telling you to do that built wealth that way. Not a single one of them. That's not how they did it. Right. And
you're totally right. Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
And I'm talking about one of the richest people in this country, in the world, right? Warren Buffett tells you that. Dave Ramsey tells you that, but that's not how they make money. And it was an interesting conversation today along those subjects. Make sure they're walking the walk.
Yep, absolutely.
So I know one of the things that you mentioned on your website, and I'd just like to just touch on it, is that we are on the razor's edge of health technology. And there are some really incredible things that are becoming out there. I know we've talked about the microbiome a little bit on the show. We've talked about how we're starting to understand functional medicine and the fascia and all these different things. What were you referring to?
I'm so glad you asked that because it's actually super relevant to the work that I do. So it actually connects up brilliantly. And nobody's ever asked this question. So I'm so happy you asked that. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in razor's edge of health technology. I love, because I'm a biomolecular engineer by training, I love nerding out on that stuff. I love diving into that stuff. I would say that the two things that are most exciting to me right now is one is that they have recently developed immunotherapies that realistically could cure cancer within 25 years. That's huge. And then the second is that they're actually looking at stopping the biological aging process and eventually reversing it. So I think there's a guy named Dr. Michael West at the company called Biotime, but we're looking at where they could realistically stop the aging process sometime in the next 30 to 50 years. And then once they stop it, then it's only a matter of time of waiting around before they eventually reverse it. So it starts off with what's called negligible senescence, and then it moves to, comprehensive cellular rejuvenation. And you're looking at a situation where then people, the whole notion of like working until you retire becomes obsolete, because if you don't have a scheduled date of expiration, then you're only, it's not a matter of grinding it out temporarily. It's a matter of grinding it out forever. And that only doubles down on what I say when I say, hey, listen, people should find something that they love to do and do that. And if you've got, an unknown amount of time on this planet, then that only becomes that much more important.
And it's going to be really hard to make your money last forever if you don't plan well and set yourself up for that, right? And that is the thing. I don't know what will happen to the world when people don't age, because if we continue to add more people, that's going to cause a whole nother problem. So hopefully they'll figure out space travel by then.
Well, so yeah, one option is stellar colonization. The other is that just because people don't age doesn't mean that they don't die, right? People can still die in car wrecks and overdoses and, obesity and all that kind of stuff. So I know that there was a guy who I was reading, he did a study where he looked at all the causes of death that were aging related and not aging related. And he found that if you took out the aging stuff, that the average human being would live like 684 years. But our society right now is not geared up for people to live 684 years. And people are not planning in their careers or their finances. But if that happens, then that shift is going to happen really quickly, because once it starts happening for the wealthiest people, I guarantee you that the governments of the world are going to find some way to make that pretty universal, pretty fast. Otherwise, there's going to be a revolution. So once those scientific breakthroughs happen, then I think that people are going to need to reevaluate their financial decision making and their career decision making pretty radically, pretty quickly.
And so until that happens, we need to focus on two areas today, which are nutrition and fitness. And I think you touch on those as well.
Even after that happens, I think that you need to do that, because even if you are biologically young, if you eat like garbage and you end up weighing 500 pounds, you can still have a heart attack and die. Right. So, I mean, I think nutrition and fitness are critical. I do CrossFit every day. I try to eat pretty healthy, low glycemic index, and there's so many resources out there on that. One really great book on the subject, if I just had to, just for the sake of time to be brief and not go into, nerding out on all the biology stuff, is I would recommend 4 Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. I would say it's the best book he's written. It's better than 4 Hour Workweek. Like, go check out 4 Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. It's a wonderful book on how to get yourself in shape.
So that was the book that started me, that actually helped me finally make that shift. And I lost 50 pounds and I am stronger and more fit than I've ever been in my life. And that book was like, I was struggling. I was trying things. Nothing ever worked except gaining weight. And somebody turned me on to that book. And I literally, it got me to the first stage. And then from there, I advanced beyond it. But it is excellent first stage book to get you to strength and weight loss and down that journey. And that was probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago. It was a long time ago that I read that book and got myself moving.
Yep. No, it's a great book. And you even get a cheat day. You can lose weight and you can have, a cheat day or a cheat meal once a week. I mean, like I was in Austin with my girlfriend just this past weekend, and we went to the Yard Milkshake Bar, which if you guys haven't heard of it, is like the most, look it up online. It's like the most sugar bomb stuff ever. But, I had one cheat meal where I had, a crazy milkshake with my girlfriend and we had some fun. So I didn't have to be Spartan. And then I go back to eating healthy, and that's okay. Right. So, I think that the strategies he uses there are really great. Right. Like, yes, it involves discipline most of the week, but it doesn't involve denying yourself forever, which I think psychologically is pretty powerful.
It is. You don't have to be perfect. Just be good 85 to 90% of the time and things work out. Based on our conversation, what's one action step people can take this week to move forward?
Well, I would highly recommend that they go to Amazon and they type in Soulfire career and they get the book. That's the big action step that I would recommend. I would also say that, I would ask yourself, like, do you want to be where you're currently working? Do you want to be there 2 years from now? Do you want to be there 5 years from now? And if that answer isn't an affirmative yes, then I would start making a plan to get out. And there's some other questions to ask, but that's probably the biggest question that I would have people ask themselves.
And I know lots of people who know the answer to that question, but do nothing about it, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then that leads to people trying to not admit it to themselves, because cognitive dissonance is a thing and human beings don't like to be in that position. But at the end of the day, a lot of the internal work really just comes back to being honest with yourself. Like I call it the commitment to truth. If you can be honest with yourself, you open up so many doors that otherwise remain locked.
That is very true. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
My secret to living an abundant life is doing what I love and being in alignment with my natural function and using that to serve other human beings. So my function in this world is to absorb, process, and transmit information. And I've found a way to create a lot of value for other people by doing something that I'm naturally built to do and operating from my area of mastery.
And that's awesome. And I've finally, I think, figured that out. And so I'm right behind you on that. This is, this alignment is coming, and meeting so many great people has helped me to get there.
Hell yeah.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I think that the lesson that I learned, especially over the past couple of years of building a business, that I really wish I had known sooner is to give myself a break when it comes to time. I always used to be such a taskmaster with myself. I would be so governed by my to-do list. And, I got to knock this out and I got to knock this out. And sometimes you got to give yourself some grace, and you got to, let the reptile part of your brain or the mammal part of your brain have a little fun and, veg out a bit and go out with friends. Don't go get, crazy wasted or whatever, but, just spending time with people who matter to you and just decompressing and doing things that allow you to get some of those happy neurotransmitters will make you more productive, more effective, and more efficient in the long run.
You have to enjoy the journey. Life is in the journey, exactly. Right? It's not in the destination. It's in the way you go. I mean, it's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
You don't have to choose between financial success and lifetime happiness. You can have both if you're willing to work for it.
And there's that 4-letter word again, work.
Yes.
It's always there. So if people would like to learn more, check out your website, connect, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, you're welcome to go to www.oculusinstitute.com. I actually just overhauled it. So we got a brand new site up. I would say that, again, the best way to connect would be to definitely check out the book. But if you go to the website, then you'll have there are other options to connect. There's a webinar, a free presentation that you can watch. There's a Facebook group I run called The Science of Career Freedom that you're welcome to join. I've got a masterclass series in there with some great stuff. And even if you just want to reach out to me, go to the website, go to the About and Contact page. There's a little form at the bottom. Shoot me an email, and I'll be there. I'll be in touch. And if by some chance, you go and you explore all that information and you think that you might be a good fit to be a client and work with me, then there's an option there to schedule a call and talk about that, and if it's a good fit, great. If it's not a good fit, I'm going to steer you towards whatever will serve you. At the end of the day, I believe that, you serve your fellow human beings and you direct them towards what's really going to help them, and the money sorts itself out.
And that is very true. Very much the same principles that I work by. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rocky. It's been fantastic. Wonderful time.
I enjoyed the conversation with Sean. His beliefs are very much in line with what we talk about on Richer Soul. What are you doing to gain the right knowledge to take action? Do you know where you're going and what you want in life? Are you in alignment with your natural talents? Do you even know what they are? What are your values? Check your calendar and your bank account to see what they're revealing about you. Have you tried any experiments to see what happens with your life? Do you love your work? If you don't, start experimenting and learning to see what might serve you better. Sorry for so many questions, but they're important for you to examine yourself and ensure you're on the right track. So, are you on the fast track to change, or are you just watching life go by? This week's action step: ask yourself, do you want to be where you are working now in the future? If not, do something about it. If you're still listening, you must have liked the episode. So please share it with a few friends. It can start a great conversation, and I'd appreciate that. You can connect with me on Facebook, either on the Facebook page or Facebook group for Richer Soul. What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I help you achieve your goals through coaching and accountability? Just email me. We can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward towards their dreams. You can always get me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.